Welcome to Book Lounge by Libby. I'm Joe, and I'm so happy you're here. This is the last week of season 3 of Book Lounge, where we're diving into steamy romances for your summer reading. To dive into the world of writing romances, I have 3 incredible guests with me, Liang, Borison, and Sara Cate. Welcome. Thank you all so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am so excited to have all of you here. So our audio-only folks can put voices to names. And again, if you want to see the video, you don't want to miss our backdrops, check out the Libby App YouTube channel or on Spotify. I'm going to go around the room, and if you want to give your name, your current release, some other projects, anything you want to shout out, great moment to do that. I always challenge myself alphabetical first name. So Anne, I'm coming to you first.
Hi, so I'm Liang, and I am the author of I Hope This Doesn't Find You. I write romance in a few different genres for different age categories. So my most recent was a young adult romance that's set at a boarding school in Beijing, and it's kind of got the rich girl, bad boy dynamic. And my next release is a complete pivot. It is a romantasy, and it's my first ever romantasy, and it's also for an adult audience, and it is called To Dream in Darkness.
To go from YA writing to adult writing and romantasy, no less, that had to be quite the shift.
It was. It really was. I feel like sometimes I do get whiplash, just like, especially when you're like revising the 2 projects around the same time, but I am very excited about the change.
And it's nice to be able to dip into like all the different waters to see what you're feeling and kind of keep your options open.
Yes, definitely.
BK, hello.
Hi, how could I possibly follow that up? My name is Borison. I just released a contemporary romance, the second in the Heartstrings series called And Now Back to You in February. And my upcoming release is again a pivot. It's a paranormal romance about a Grim Reaper who has grown tired of death. And so she decides she will save her next soul instead of claiming it. It's called Grim Tidings, and it comes out in September.
Okay, but love that.
I'm so excited.
Yeah.
Like, I have been seeing this book. Like, I have to say, it is one of my like top anticipated releases.
Thank you.
Oh, no.
Yeah. I know we lost Sarah.
Oh no. Well, hopefully she pops back in.
She's like, I don't want to hear about Grim Tidings. I'm out.
She's like, no more of this. BK, was this your first foray into paranormal romance?
No, so this is actually the second in a series. The first,
Okay.
I did my first book, Good Spirits, last winter, which was about the ghost of Christmas past haunts the wrong woman. And so that was my first little slip into paranormal. And when I pitched this series to my agent, we were at lunch and I had just finished a contemporary series. And she was like, what do you want to do next? And I was like, I have this idea about ghosts. And she was like, okay. But yeah, I've been having a lot of fun. It's nice creatively. And I don't know if this is the same for you, but like when I switch from rules of our world to rules of a paranormal world or a fantasy world, it's fun. You're like, I can make up all the answers.
I was just gonna say, I do love the switch because it's also like, I feel like when you're writing paranormal or like something with fantasy, you can be so dramatic. And it's like you can draw upon different types of like a different writing style that you don't always get to use with contemporary. Because it's like if certain people spoke like that in the real world, you're like kind of like, what's wrong with them? Like, why are they talking like that? But then it's like, it's fine if it's like paranormal, or it's like fantasy. So yeah, it is a lot of fun.
No, that's so interesting. Have you found, for both of you, kind of a space that you like most, or is it nice to be able to jump around and kind of just try what you want?
I think for me, it's nice. I love that my agent, even though she was really hesitant, she was very supportive in the end. She wanted me to do what felt right to me. And creatively, it's such a breath of fresh air to be doing contemporary, and to switch is like accessing a different part of my brain. And so for me, my brain really enjoys it.
I agree. It almost feels like it's like I'm resting like one part of my brain when I'm working on something else. And then by the time I come back to it, that part is like rejuvenated. It's kind of like, and I say this as someone who doesn't actually work out, but from what I hear, it's like when people work out like different parts of their body. So they're doing like back one day and like arms the other. And it's like you don't want to continuously just be targeting like one spot. And I think it's interesting. I feel like it does end up helping. Like, I think sometimes I pick up on things when I'm writing my more like magical, like fantasy books. And then I apply them like in a more like subtle way with like my contemporary and like vice versa.
I could totally see that. Now, as we start to work our way into the conversation for today, the time that this is coming out, it's like the mid to end of June. Everyone's got trips galore and they want something romantic for their summer reading list. They're taking it to the beach. What makes a perfect summer romance read for both of you?
Ooh,
I
it's a
know,
very good question.
starting off with the tough ones.
I
I
think
think,
probably something escapist, like
yeah,
something that probably doesn't. I think romance has the connotation sometimes that there's not true substance to it, which I couldn't disagree with more. I think the joy of romance is that you know you're going to get a happy ending at the end of the book. So you're very secure in the journey to get there. But I think sometimes people dismiss the happy ending guarantee as treating it as a frivolous or not important. And I think falling in love is the most important thing that you can possibly do. And so I think people like to associate those good happy ending feelings with summer. I mean, I think we have enough bad things in the world. When
Yeah.
people go on vacation and are sitting on a beach and drinking a mai tai, they want to be with people who are falling in love, I think.
yeah, no, I totally agree with that. If anything, I feel like it is easier to be kind of like cynical and it is much harder to cling on to the love and like the joy and the hope, especially during like, just like with the current state of things and everything going on. Yeah, I feel like that is also why I gravitate towards like romance books, like especially it's just like during summer. I think another kind of like metric that I have is just like can it really hold my attention on a plane? Because it's like when you are like, stuck in the back of a plane for a few hours, like the book, it needs to really like grip you. It's like during those times, especially that I'm like drawn to romance because you get so lost in like that world and like the banter and just like all of like, like the romantic scenes and like you're so invested in like the characters and the chemistry that you can just like ignore the turbulence. That is basically like my ideal book and like just like the state that I want to be in.
I love both of those points because, right, I think romance catches a lot of flack. Um, because what I have found as I've started to read more romance in my reader diet is I love that I know it is a happily ever after. Like, I don't have to let myself fully feel the stakes and be concerned. I love that I can give it as much or as little as want or need to give it while I'm reading. But also the flip side, the ability to grip you and to just kind of say, like, because it's so easy. You get on that plane and you're just kind of going, like, oh, I could hop in the back. I could ignore this. I could, let whatever go on. But there's something nice about just kind of going, like, oh, this book is for me, and this one is the one. And Sarah, welcome back. Sorry, folks, we had some weird technical difficulties. Sarah, if you could give us your intro, and then I would love your answer to the question of what makes a perfect summer read for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, sorry. My name is Sara Cate. I am the author of Praise, which is my most well known title, is the first book in the Salacious Players Club series. It's adult contemporary, spicy, kinky, queer. And my newest release is The Rule of Three, second book in the second gen series. And the question again was,
Yeah, what's your like ideal summer romance read? Yeah.
oh man, I love anything that is like easy in, quick, it draws you in immediately, quick plot, super steamy, something you can just like melt with and enjoy.
Oh no.
Oh no. Well, technology may fail us today, and that's okay. Um,
She's
we'll
just
just
being mysterious.
she is so mysterious today. And I'm like, but come on, kinky queer romance, I'm
I
sad.
know.
Well, on that note, all of you write romance in very different ways. So I'd love to start at the beginning of what made you fall in love with romance as a genre in the first place. Was romance always something you wanted to write? Was there a specific book or author, or maybe even a film that changed your mind? And what has kind of become your purpose while you write romance?
I think for me, I loved reading romance books since I was pretty young, like probably too young.
And
And
that's the way.
yeah. And just I enjoyed it so much, but I actually never thought of becoming a romance writer in the beginning. And I feel like part of it was because of the way that people like perceive me. Like I feel like there's again similar to like what you were saying before about, just people like tend to really like judge romance or they're just like certain like connotations surrounding it. And I feel like people thought of me as very like serious in my day-to-day life. And I remember when I was like telling my friends, I was like, oh, I'd love to like write a book. And they were quite genuinely like, oh, like, is it going to be about like taxes or like just like the economic system? And I was like, okay, so this is like what people are expecting from me apparently. And I do actually remember when I later decided to try writing romance and I told someone really close to me that I was writing rom-com. She genuinely thought that I was kidding. And she was like, oh, that's really funny. Yeah, like sure.
Oh,
But I was like, no, this is
Rude.
something that I really love and have actually loved for a long time. And I think it's just like reactions like that that had made me kind of hesitant to go
yeah.
for it. And so I remember when I wrote my debut book, If You Could See the Sun, when I originally wrote it, it was focusing a bit more on like the setting. And I was like pitching it kind of as like Gossip Girls, more about like just like crimes and scandals. And there was a romantic subplot that I had fun writing and I didn't really plan for that to be like a big thing. But then I remember when we were submitting it to editors and even like from my agent, a lot of them were like, oh, like my favorite part of this is actually the romance. Like I really enjoy like the chemistry between the characters. And I think to me that was just like it was so validating. It was also really exciting because I was like, oh, I didn't know that was something that I could write. And
Yeah.
I really and I remember my editor doing like the first round of revisions, one of the notes she gave me was just like, can we have more scenes with them? Like, can we have them go on a date? And I was like, wait, that is so fun. Like, I am so going to lead into this. Like, I can't believe I get to just do this. And then so when it came time for like my second book, This Time It's Real, that was just like a fluffy rom-com because I was like, why not just, try to actually like start off making this like a romance. And ever since then, it's like what I've been writing. So it feels in a way like it was something that was like totally unplanned, but then looking back, I guess it also makes sense. Like it's always made me really happy. And I also do agree that like I feel like falling in love is one of the most like incredible and like beautiful things that could happen. And just like all like the range of experiences and like the intensity of emotions and everything. And I feel like one of the best kind of feedback that I could get from readers and like what I'm trying to achieve with like every romance book I write is when they're like, oh, this made me believe in love again. Because I think it's also
Yeah.
just like, like you hear horror stories all the time about like the dating market out there and like just like how tough it is. And I feel like it's really easy to just kind of give up and think like, is that all that's out there, like maybe love is just like a lie and it's just something that you see in like movies. So for
Right.
people to read it and then think like, okay, like this is maybe this love is like out there for me. And especially for people to be like, oh, like maybe I'm like deserving of this love and like I could get that for myself. It just makes me really happy. Cause I do believe that like everyone deserves that kind of love.
Yeah. That's really beautiful. BK, what
How
about
do I
you?
follow these answers?
But but you have to have either something that made you want to write romance or even what do you aim for? Like
Yeah.
when you sit down with a new book in hand, what makes you go, this is the reason I do this.
Well, I had a similar journey to romance. I feel like most romance authors discovered romance way too early, whether it was like in their aunt's closet at the beach house or like in mom's nightstand, one of those dog-eared step back novels.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
but as a kid or as a young adult, even like whenever I would consume media, I would be like, okay, but I want more of the love story. I always wanted more from the love stories and anything I watched. And
Yeah.
for some unknown, we had the golden age of rom-coms in the early 90s. And since then, it's been like Hollywood was like, okay, this is working so great, but we're not going to do those anymore. And and
These are great. Everyone loves them. We're done.
we're done. Meg Ryan doesn't want to make them anymore, so we're just done.
Mm-mm.
Um, but I think for me, I just sort of fell into writing romance purely as something for me to satisfy that urge in myself. And like I love stories. For me, when I start writing them, when I disappear into the story, I feel very safe and comforted. And it's just like a happy place for me to disappear to. So it's selfish
Yeah.
when I write. It's me chasing that for myself. And I think one of the most surprising things about publishing books um, and connecting with readers has been that these things that feel safe and good for me feel safe and good for so many other people too. I think that's been the
Mm.
most rewarding piece of it is when readers come up to me at events and they're like, I felt seen or I felt safe. And this is where I go to when I need to feel good about myself. And so it feels like a gift to be able to give that to other people and still have it for myself.
I also love that. I think it speaks to what you were mentioning earlier about a great summer romance having escapism, but like that generally it's not just escapism, it also functions as like the metaphysical third space that like this is a place
Yeah.
people can disappear to, kind of like fall in. And when it comes to romance, there is a genre and a subgenre and a sub-subgenre for everyone. You can find a home in the romance world.
And it's truly such a community, like in every
Yeah.
sense of the word, like at in person events, at conventions, online, in chat rooms, newsletters. I have never felt so welcomed into a group
Yeah.
of like minded people. And I think for a lot of us, we're struggling to find that sort of connection, one to one connection.
Mhm.
Um, Post pandemic, in a
Yeah.
very digital world, social media can be a bit of a hellscape. And so
Yeah.
to disappear into books and to consume these love stories and have them resonate, and then to find people that resonated with the same things, it's such a special thing. It's just like little pings, not no, it doesn't matter where you
Yeah.
are. It's seeing pieces of yourself and other people.
Now, when you're both building romance into your stories, what is essential to you to make that romance feel satisfying? I'm thinking chemistry, conflict, contrast, tension, intimacy. What are some of the things that make you go, I've rounded this the way I want it?
It's so hard because I always feel like, like creating chemistry in books, it's kind of just like going on dates in real life where you can never be fully sure. And it's like, even if on paper, sometimes it seems like the two characters would make sense and go well together, it's like when they interact, sometimes there's just something missing. And it's like very hard to explain why.
Yeah.
And so I think I have to go through that process. It's almost like I'm setting these characters up and I'm like seeing like, okay, like, do they have that spark? Like, do they just like have that element that, gets you really invested? So I think one of the things that I am drawn to is there has to be some element of like kind of like friction or like contrast between them, like especially at the beginning of the book. Because I think part of that like romantic journey is that they change in some way like because of each other and but in order for that change to happen they have to be like challenged in some way, like they might have like slightly different views or just like very different personalities and I think that's also where a lot of these like tropes come from, like the whole like enemies to lovers or like rivals to lovers or like like the grump sunshine dynamic, like all of these, it's really just about like at the beginning they're sometimes on just like opposite ends, and they're like kind of like opposed to each other. And then like slowly throughout the course, you see them like they reach this like this state where it's like having that person in their life has made their life different and like, you know, for the better.
Right. You can see how the black cat figured out how to curl up with the golden retriever. Totally.
Yeah,
Essentially, yeah.
to your point about having the characters interact with each other, it sounds bananas when you tell people you're like letting the voices in your head talk, you know? It's just like, and sometimes they don't do what you want them to do, but they're things, they're creations of your own mind.
Exactly. Yeah.
But you have to get to know them through the writing process. And sometimes you're like, this character is gonna be this. And then you start writing them and you're like, oh no, you're not that. Now we need to figure out how these two characters orbit each other. There's a term for the type of writer that I like to use because it's fancy. It's called discovery writing, but really it's like you have no idea what you're doing. You're just you're just like I think most people call it pantsing and
I was
plotting,
going to
but
say,
yes,
yeah.
pantsers and plotters. But I'm like, no, actually, I'm a discovery writer. I'm
Discovery
not.
writer.
I'm discovery writing right now.
Love that.
Sounds so much more formal than pantser. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I'm discovery writing, guys.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, same, very same with my characters. I try to write them. They're always two halves of a whole.
Yeah.
And wherever one falls short, I try to think, okay, if this one has a jagged piece here, where's the other piece and how does it match up with each other? Um, because in a romance, the reader should believe that these two characters are meant for each other and only each other. Even when I'm not writing paranormal or magic, I like having magic in a romance. You know, I love the magic
Yeah.
of finding the one person that you're meant for, and the whole wild, like a wonderful world, this massive world, you still find that one person meant for you. So I like that little bit of magic, even in a contemporary.
I was going to say, no matter how contemporary a romance may be, I think there always has to be an element of magic, even if it is just the glimmer of romance. Because that, you know,
Mhm.
like I think love is the truest magic we have, kind of thing, to just get to feel that with someone else. How do you balance swoony moments and emotional depth? How do you keep things dynamic in these relationships? Because sure, you have a tough job of like getting us from point A, they hate each other potentially, to point B, they're in love, without it feeling too just like, and then the switch flipped.
I do struggle with that often. Even when I'm like on the fourth or fifth draft and I'm reading it, I'm like, is this too
Mm,
fast? I've tried
Mm,
to do
yeah.
like fast burns as opposed to a slow burn where like it's an instant connection, but like it's so tricky figuring out, and for each character it's different and each story it's different, and you have to figure out, okay, what is it about them that is drawing them together? And so it changes every time, and my approach changes every time, and I'm never satisfied. Every time, every draft, I there has to be a point where someone just yanks it away from me, because every draft I'm like, I will keep changing this book until someone yanks this book away.
Until we've got a completely new book.
Yeah.
like I struggle with the same thing, and I feel like part of it is because it is so subjective. Like for like the same book and like the same romantic storyline progression and everything, I will get feedback from one person who is like, this is like too slow burn. Like this is not for me. Like they're not kissing within like the first 100 pages. Like, you know, everything is just like dragging on. But then someone else could say like on the same day, like, oh, this was like insta love. Like, how did they immediately become attracted to each other? And so I think it's one of those things because with like romance, everyone has like their own personal preferences as well for like how they want that like love story to unfold. And like in real life too, right? Like we all approach our relationships differently. And so yeah, I think I also just like I really struggle with that. And I think I just have to get to a point where I'm like, okay, like probably like you can't please everyone. And like there
Right.
might be some people who find it like too fast, too slow. But I ultimately, like, ideally, I want to get to a place where it feels kind of like natural or at least like believable.
Yeah.
And I think like if I can get there, then I'm like, okay, like I will like step aside.
I think that really speaks to our world as well, because I think some of the pressures we put on ourselves when we think of what feels too fast in a relationship, when we're telling our friends about updates and things, or like, oh, well, what does our timeline mean versus what is the world's timeline? And do any of these ever line up? I think there's so much to it. And I can't imagine what you have to balance because, like, I still haven't figured out how to describe a spice level of a romance book to the audience because I'm like,
Oh, yes.
It's
I don't
so
know.
That is
personal.
another thing. Yeah,
Right.
everyone's, like, personal scale for that varies so much. Like, some people are like, "This is, like, the spiciest thing I've ever read," and then other people are like, "This is, like, nothing happens in this book." Like, "What do you mean?" It's like
Yeah, the metrics always crack me up.
yeah.
There'll be 2 reviews on top of each other. It's like, "No spice," and then it's like, 4 chili peppers, and I'm like,
Right.
"Okay."
And I'm like, so do we need to like oddly average this out or yeah, I don't know. So I feel like if you're new to romance, anything I recommend is probably add a pepper to it, to say the least. But speaking of spice, romance readers are having much more open conversations about spice levels. They're looking for, I think now more than even just a year ago. Has this changed the way that you both approach intimacy in your writing? How are you balancing reader expectations with what you see for your characters as they're talking to you? How spicy have you written? How spicy do you want to go? Yeah. And Anne, of course, writing romantic tension and spice in YA versus what you might be doing in your romantasy. I, different worlds.
Yeah, so I think interestingly, it's something that I haven't written spice before, but
Mm-hmm.
then I think about it so much because so many people will, like, ask me, like, like,
Yeah.
"Is there spice in your books?" Like, "Will you ever write spice in your books?" And it comes from both ends, I think, from, like, the reader's end, and it also does come, I think, from, like, the publisher's end a little bit because just, like, with how, like, the industry has changed, and so that's one of the considerations when it comes to, like, how are we going to kind of, like, pitch or, like, sell this book, and, like, I think one of my biggest fears with, my adult debut, A Song to Drown Rivers, that came out, and that was not a romantasy, but I was seeing it pitched as a romantasy, and
Interesting. Yeah.
then I saw a lot of people go into it expecting it to be very spicy, and I was like, "Oh my god, like, this is set, like, in the courts of ancient China where you're, like, not even allowed to, like, casually brush hands." Like, this is, like, the opposite of
This
spice.
is Yearning City. Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like I was making, like, basically, like, PSAs of me just being like, "This is, like, not spicy. Like, please do not go into it expecting spice." And so I think expectation management is one thing because, like,
Yeah.
and I totally get, like, for some readers, sometimes you're, like, in the mood to pick up a really spicy book, and then so if it isn't that at all,
Yeah.
it's just, like it's, like, a very confusing experience, and now that I'm, like, writing more in the adult space, I've also increasingly considered, like, "Oh, is this, like, something that I want to, like, write more of?" And I feel like it is honestly see, that's another thing. I feel like even though we are talking more about spice, I feel like it's still something that people, like, discredit a lot in a way, like, people don't realize that it's actually I feel like it's, like, one of the hardest things to write, honestly.
Yeah.
Just, like because you're trying to just, like, capture that level of, like, intensity and, like, intimacy, and just, like, the range from, like, like, a badly written, like, spice scene and, like, a really good and effective one, like, it's, like, massive, and so
Yeah.
I always feel like if I were to write it, like, I would really, really wanna, like, do it justice, and also there's just, like I feel like there's nothing more, like, humbling and, like, horrifying than getting a lot of, like, copy editor notes on, like, a spice scene. Just being
Oh God.
It
I
is.
can't imagine that.
It it is a level of detail that you don't want to consider those scenes in. And I'm sad Sarah got ripped away by the internet because I would so desperately love her viewpoint on this. But
Right.
yeah, I mean, I have always included open door intimacy in my books, and it's important for me to do that because I feel like when 2 characters there's no point where two characters are more honest with each other and you can see their dynamics and vulnerability with one another than intimate scenes. And I think it's such a culmination of the way those characters communicate and respect each other and, move together. I think
Mhm.
writing Open Door is very much, it feels like choreography almost.
Yeah.
And it has its own rhythm of how that scene moves. My biggest pet peeve as an author, and I always say I probably shouldn't say this, but I hate when readers say, you can just skip the open door scenes and you can still enjoy the book because as an author, those scenes are serving such a purpose to the larger story. It's where they're connecting, it's where, they're being vulnerable with one another. And even the silly, fun sex scenes serve a greater point to the relationship building of the story. It's a step towards the culmination of them falling in love with one another. And sex is normal, sex is good, sex is great. The whole
Right.
world has sex. So um, I think we're sort of as a society, and I think this is what the issue people take with romance sometimes is they sort of brush it off as just like, those smutty, silly books. And I think it's because it's a genre that's largely, I think it's the only place in media where we see women's pleasure centered and celebrated instead of the male gaze, the male
Yeah.
gaze version of women's pleasure. And I think media over the past decade has centralized pleasure in a way that is very violent towards women.
Mhm.
Like when you think of Game of Thrones, it's predominant.
My gosh.
Most of the sex scenes
Yeah.
are very violent and aggressive. And so when you have the romance industry that centers pleasure as consensual and vulnerable and romantic and beautiful, it's sort of, I think, people like to minimize that. And I don't know why. I hate it. But I'm very passionate about
Yeah.
including those scenes as building blocks to the true romance of the novel.
That makes so much sense. I mean, everything, it's all a detail that builds the story. Like, you cannot skip it because you are missing elements of character dynamics. You are missing so much. And I think that the other thing is there are all pepper ratings. If you want closed door, if you don't want intimacy in your, like, if you don't want sex in your books, there are books for you to go read instead. Like, the options are there. So the concept of, oh, I just skip the sex scenes is wild to me because it's like, I didn't feel like reading chapter 15, so I just didn't. Like, okay, okay,
Yeah,
good luck.
it's
All
almost
right
like
then.
I saw this conversation on TikTok and I had to like remove myself from the app because someone was saying like they don't read dialogue tags. Like they just read the dialogue. They don't read what comes after it. And I'm
Wow.
like, help me. As an author, that's a nightmare. Like, don't do that. Read the book. Read the book.
That requires so much self-control to, like, remove yourself from that because I like, even hearing about it, I'm just
I
like
was like,
You're like,
I just
I'm going to
imagine
hunt it
myself.
down and add to the conversation. I also like, I'm a fast reader. I can't imagine the control it takes to be like, okay, and I'm skipping over. Like, I don't know. I just be like, but what are those words? I want to know them.
Mhm.
Did it save me any time to just go dialogue by dialogue? Like,
And at
I-
that point, why are you reading this book? What do you want to get out of this book? What are you hoping for?
what was your end goal if you only read like 70% of the book at that
And
point?
Yeah,
then
I
and
mean,
then
that's
to have the audacity to say, and I didn't like it.
yeah.
Like,
Right. Right. 2 stars rounded up to for 2.5 stars rounded up to 3, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, you didn't read the book.
but I
That's
read the
just
dialogue and I skipped the sex scenes.
yeah.
Two
I don't know
stars.
why everyone recommended this. 2 stars. I read, 10%, but completed. I mean, and like, I just want people to read what they like. There are so many books in the world, and it's truly like, there's an ass for every chair when it comes to books. Like, you can find what you want. You don't have to like make up these games to have a reading experience. Like, just I don't just like Google a little bit. Listen to this podcast. I'll find weird books for you. Send me a DM. Like, You tell me your specific thing in the comments, and I'll give you some recs. I promise. I'll do my work. Now, of course, I have to ask you both about tropes. They are such a huge part of how readers can discover books that they might like without having to skim around. See, there was a good segue in there somewhere. Uh, do you both like working within tropes, or do you feel boxed in? Do you write? Do you just write and then kind of check the boxes that they fill later?
I feel like I kind of have a love-hate relationship with tropes sometimes. And it's also like because it's also different coming at it from like a writer versus a reader. And I think that, like tropes can be really fun, but I think like the industry has picked them up in a way where it's like this book is no longer just something with like an enemies to lovers, like romance. Like it's like this is an enemies to lovers book, almost as if it's kind of like a classification. And, I think that's when it can start to feel like a bit restrictive, and it's also just the fact that I think I've seen my books then sometimes almost kind of like mislabeled as like, "Oh, like this is enemies to lovers," and I think as soon as, like, people hear that, they now just have this, like, assumption of like how the book is going to go. And like
Right.
there are times when I'm like, I wouldn't describe them as like enemies or like, I don't think they're like rivals here. And so but then once I think people hear that the whole time they're reading, like they're reading it through this lens of like,
Hmm.
okay, like they're enemies. And then how, whether like they enjoy that book and how they judge that book is now just like according to the scale of like how much did they hate each other and like were they actually enemies or not. And even that I think is another thing similar to like the spice rating where everyone has kind of like a different understanding or like this like different level of like what like I've seen so many people argue like what is true like enemies to lovers, like can you have like enemies to lovers in like a contemporary setting, like is it actually enemies or like is it one-sided enemies, but if it's only one-sided like are they really enemies, like and just like these conversations like I
Yeah.
see them happening all the time. And so I think I try to like not look too much into it because then it gets very hard. And I never want to like start off a book also just being like, oh, this is going to be like an enemies to lovers book. For me, I think I like to think about tropes like later on or like
Hmm.
when it's like that book is like almost finished, and we're thinking about, okay, like how do we like present this book? I'm like, okay, like that makes sense. But I think during like the writing process, I think it's sometimes it's good for me to just have like a general sense of like kind of relationship. Like obviously, like, do they start off like, do they like each other or
Yeah.
are they like arguing all the time? But I feel like I think it letting just like that relationship like go where it needs to go, like on the page.
The writing is doing its work first. And then
Like
as you're kind of
hopefully,
like
yeah,
building the package, that's when you're going, I would comp this as, or like, here's
yeah,
the nutrition label for
yes,
this book. Yeah.
exactly, yeah,
Yeah, exactly that. I think uh, a publisher loves a trope list because it's
Yep.
shorthand for readers.
Yeah.
And they're inevitably after I turn a book in, they're like, okay, what are the tropes? And I'm like, what are the tropes? I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, I need to go look at what the tropes are. And like, I love the tropes because they are these, every genre has tropes, archetypes, things that, literature is completely based on is these ideas that we can easily pull from. And in romance, there's so many fun ones that you can play with and sort of subvert. And as a writer, they're really handy tools to have. And, you want to give readers a little reward, like, that if 2 characters are going out to the mountains, there better be 1 bed at that hotel, because it's like if there's not, readers might be disappointed, and I think
Right.
readers get giddy over the anticipation of like, "Okay, they're going to this hotel. I know what's gonna happen, and I can't wait to see it,"
Yes.
it's fun from that perspective, but to Anne's point, there's also the, like, "Okay, well, they said this was enemies to lovers," or "I heard it was enemies to lovers, and it's not enemies enough," or "I heard this was a slow burn, but they're kissing like, these metrics that they set, like, well, if they're
Right.
kissing before page 50, then it's not a slow burn, but if you carry over in chapter 14, it's like these weird
The weird
um,
math. Yeah.
weird romance math that happens sometimes, and it's like the most frustrating thing I have found as an author is that when you're done with a book and you publish it, it's not your book anymore. And you can try to put as much as you can into it. I mean, saying like, I meant this, here, have it. But readers will always read it with their own history and their own lens. And so if a reader's like, this is what I thought of it, and you're like, no, I didn't mean that. You don't have that anymore. It's a one-way conversation. You give it to a reader and the readers talk about it, and that's that. You can't be in
Yeah.
every review being like, I didn't mean it like that. And, you can't, no one reads books wrong. Everybody reads books how it's shaped to them, how their worldview shapes it. And
Yeah.
so that's been challenging for me to be like, okay, I said this was enemies to lovers, and it is to me, but it might not be to you. And you're
Yeah.
totally right. And it's hard when people allow that to impact their enjoyment of the book because they're clinging to the tropes so tightly that they can't see the forest for the trees. They're just like, where is it? I want this very specific. They're chasing a high that you're not
Yeah.
Yeah.
giving them based on the trope.
I love when now they just put like, these are the tropes that we've found in this book on the description because they go, oh, okay, I like these things. But I, as not like a born romance reader,
Yeah.
don't have set expectations. I just go, I like that concept. Like to me, they're very high level. So I enjoy the ride based off of the tropes I already know I like. And I go, okay, I'll pick that one up. But right, the fact is there's no like rubric out there that outlines what exactly it means to be enemies to lovers or what something is if it's a court intrigue. Like, eh, not every court intrigue is going to be a fey court. Like, I'm so sorry,
Where
but
are the fairy wings? Where are the fairy wings?
yep, exactly. So I think it's so fascinating. And it is such a vocal community of readers, which is a brilliant thing, but also has to be so hard to stop yourself from looking at. Because if you spent time responding to reviews, you'd never write another book again because there will always be someone saying, like, this is what I thought. So
It's funny if you're on Goodreads an author profile and you click on a review to respond to it, Goodreads will has a pop-up that says, "Are you sure you want to?"
and
And
that's smart.
someone's looking out for the authors because,
Yeah.
when you write a book as an author, my advice that I always give to authors that are just starting out is you have to write the book for yourself. You have to. Because if you're writing a book with all of your readers in your mind, it's going to be too loud. You won't be able to hear anything. And so
Yeah.
it has to be for yourself or you will lose it.
Yeah.
And to your earlier point, like books, writing, it is art. And we all come in with our own, right? Our pasts, our preconceived notions, a whole plethora of things. But just the same way as like a painting may invoke a certain thing out of you, a book will do the same thing because it's resonating with a part of you that needed that. Like you're not always going to be a one for the main character in the book, but you are very likely going to be able to put yourself in those shoes. And the part of you that you didn't know needed a cry or needed a laugh is going to be fed that. So, right, you can't control everything. So it's just kind of like, I don't have a perfect answer. I just know why I did it. Now, as readers of romance, what are some of both of your favorite tropes to read? Or do you have any go-to? I mean, maybe you're just like, I just read whatever this person writes or
Honestly, I think I've realized that as a reader, I don't necessarily gravitate towards any particular tropes. And I actually think that's one of the things, like tropes make it so easy for you to just say, like, I like this trope, or like, either like I'm gonna write this trope or I'm gonna read this trope. But I feel like in reality, it's really more for me, I think the most important thing is like writing style. And I think that's why it's like when a writer, they just like the way that they see the world and describe the world, like the way that their characters feel, like
yeah,
that is what's like really important to me. I think tropes are more important in selecting books for me when it comes to like tropes that I want to avoid. Cause like it's like there are
yes,
like a lot of tropes I don't mind reading, like, whether it's friends, lovers, enemies, lovers, but there are certain tropes where I'm like, if I know like that's going to happen, then I might be like, for instance, I mean, and this is obviously not like, it's like a case by case thing, just like
Yeah.
overall though, for like, if I know that like there's going to be like cheating happening in like this
Hmm.
book, for instance, that might make me a bit more like concerned, like something like
Yeah.
that. But then, yeah, I feel like I'm like pretty flexible in terms of like the trope stuff.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like to read like the back copy summary, or even like if I'm in a bookstore, I'll just read the first page of a book to see again if I'm vibing with like the style of it. Because I feel like even tropes I avoid, I feel like in the hands of a really good writer, I'd probably like it, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I like books to be a surprise. Like if it is enemies to lovers, I don't always want to know, you know, like sometimes I like to be surprised by what happens with the character. So
I I relate
I
to
like
that.
hearing yeah, I like feeling like the clues, like if they're going somewhere, it's like, oh, this might happen and I'm excited by that. I want to be excited by the journey.
Right. I want to exactly that. I want to be on the journey with the characters to be like, oh, that's how we. Okay, cool. I'm in. Is there anything you notice changing in the romance space right now? Trends, indie romance booms, book talk, reader openness. Anything you've got like a
Uh,
finger on?
I do think there's a where I feel like we're in maybe the middle or maybe on the downturn of a romance boom. I feel like I've always felt that indie romance sort of sets the tone for the whole industry. I think indie authors are more daring and things they'll try, and they sort of set the trends before traditional publishing picks them up. I think you can see too with the acquisitions of indie authors by major publishing houses. I started out in indie. There's a lot of indie authors who have been picked up by traditional. And so I
Oh,
think there's still very exciting things happening with indie authors that I love watching and seeing. I think
yeah.
what's really interesting from a business perspective is Ali Hazelwood and Adriana Herrera's After the End campaign, where they did a Kickstarter
Yeah.
and they created their own books and published them straight from author to consumer to reader. And I think in industry that still doesn't prioritize marginalized voices and queer stories,
Hmm.
it's a really interesting, exciting idea to see a group of marginalized voices put out the stories they want to tell and to have readers consume it so voraciously. It sort of feels like there was a destruction of the gatekeeping that sometimes happens.
Yeah.
And so I'm excited to see more of those stories amplified and told.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I know. I really love that too. And it's so exciting. I think another thing that I've noticed about like I think where romance is right now, and this kind of applies to just like the book industry in general, is definitely just like the way that books are talked about online. And it's which is also very tricky coming at it from like an author because there's like a part of me like I love connecting with readers online and like I love, talking about my books and sharing my books. And I think that's also one of the reasons like a lot of readers like they tell me they're like, oh, like I first heard about your book on like TikTok. But then I think on the flip side of that, sometimes it's like it feels like if your book isn't like doesn't do well as a TikTok, like if you can't condense your book into like a TikTok pitch, if you don't
Yeah.
have, like a really nice Instagram aesthetic for your book, then like the chances of it being like discovered are like it feels like those odds are not working in your favor, which like I don't know, it just makes me kind of sad for like because there's so many like kind of like quieter romance stories or stories that like don't necessarily fall under a certain particular like romance trope or it's just like a bit harder to pitch in that format. And like I would hate for those to just like be lost because we have all of these like more kind of like, there's always like some kind of like trend that's going on. Um
Right.
and yeah, and I definitely feel that like authors might experience like other authors I've spoken to have definitely like there's kind of this like implied pressure for you to be very much like, like actively like selling your book on these social media platforms.
Yeah.
Like I love doing it and I enjoy doing it, but then I think it's also like it's strange that that would be like an expectation that like all authors should do it in order for people to learn about their books. Because I feel like our main job is, obviously like writing the book. And then once it's done, like it's, you just kind of want to like release it into the world and like let it speak for itself.
Right. Such a difference between like, yeah, we've seen the success of authors who they do love it and they want to be doing it versus now kind of that shift in expectation of, well, we see that it works. So get out your selfie stick and learn the TikTok dance. Like it sounds exhausting. That sounds like a lot of pressure to put on you after writing a book.
I can't dance, so not a problem for me.
You're like, I won't even try the dance. Don't worry.
I will not.
To start to wind us down, could I tempt you both with a lightning round?
Yes. I love lightning rounds.
Okay. Instant attraction or slow burn?
Slow burn.
Slow burn.
Friends to lovers or enemies to lovers?
Enemies to lovers.
Friends to lovers.
Fake dating or accidental marriage?
Oh.
Fake dating.
Fake dating.
One bed or stuck in a snowstorm?
Both.
I'm like, those are kind of perfect together, but.
So yeah. Yeah. If I had to choose, one bed.
Okay. Yes or no, love triangles?
Maybe. I keep
Really
subverting your
depends on
questions.
execution. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Third act breakup, necessary or evil?
Necessary.
Mm.
Necessary
Again.
evil.
Yeah. Necessary evil, totally.
Yeah.
Who falls first?
Him? Or?
Okay.
I'm
Yeah.
actually okay with her falling first. I just
Okay.
need him to fall harder.
Okay. So to follow that, who says I love you first?
I like when the rigid character, the most reluctant. I like when the most reluctant character in the partnership is the one to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna steal that answer. I do really.
Favorite pet name in romance?
I'm gonna be super controversial. I don't like pet names.
Ooh, love
That is
it.
I'm so
controversial.
sorry. Don't get me canceled. It's like I
Clip
can't.
it.
It's like it's okay. Like when I'm like reading it, but just like there's like nothing. Like it has to just like work like in that context in the moment.
Right. Not like
And I'm
forced into the
instantly like,
narrative.
oh, like I would melt at like this word. I think it's like a me in like a real life thing.
Yeah.
I like a very sparsely used one. Like if it's just like it's like if it's used only once or twice in like a moment of vulnerability, like that's perfect to me.
Oh, love that. And then what's your ideal setting?
Oh, I don't know. I'm like, what is my ideal setting?
Even if it's one you haven't done yet, like where would you want to set like just the perfect romance story?
I haven't done a beachy rom-com yet. I would love to do a beachy summery rom-com.
Yeah.
I think like somewhere kind of like a somewhere isolated. I don't know, like a little
like
remote like cottage or whatever. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I haven't done something like that before.
No, the only thing that came to me was like I was thinking like a cottage by a lake. So I almost combining you two was where my brain went. I was like, I think that's my like that's just I think where my boyfriend and I are going to take a trip too, but whatever. And final question, what do you hope your readers feel after finishing one of your books? Little less lightning, that's just to round out the episode.
I hope that my readers feel safe and taken care of and that they are just as deserving of a love story as the characters they just fell in love with.
Oh.
I think I would want them to feel a sense of like comfort and also that, I want them to feel less alone, whether that's just in terms of like whether they have or like they will find the love that they read about. And also just in terms of like, all the feelings that like they feel right now is like someone else feels it too.
Oh, you two are too good at this. Like, that's exactly it. Like, just perfect. But Anne, BK, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing more about romances.
Of course. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you
I had
for
so much
having
fun.
us.
And friends, you can find all of our guests' info linked in the show notes. Check them out. Make sure you're following and subscribed to the show. You won't want to miss this Thursday's episode when I'm joined by your romance destiny to share romance reading recs to fill up your TBR. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, happy reading. You can sample and borrow the books from today's episode in the Libby app, or if you're a librarian, find them for purchase in Overdrive Marketplace. Book Lounge by Libby is a proud Evergreen Podcast signature program. Explore more amazing shows at evergreenpodcasts.com. This podcast is produced and recorded by me, Joe Skelly, with editing by Andrew Alonso. Our theme music is High Five by Rex Banner, used with permission. Book Lounge by Libby is presented by the Libby app. Learn more at libbylife.com/booklounge.